another deep dive with a congressional candidate who might be my future representative in the U.S. Congress, looking to represent Silicon Valley, California's 16th district. So, welcome to the show, Ahmed. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. Hey, everybody. Nice to meet you all. I'm excited to be here.
I noticed that there's a good crop of people making a run for it, and I'm
hmm
curious. You could have just said, "Oh, there's a bunch of other people already running. It'll be fine." Why did you decide to throw your hat in the ring?
Yeah, I would say for me, it's about people. My whole entire career has been about serving others. Like ever since I was an undergrad, I was student body president. I registered the most students to vote in the entire nation. We actually, because of the student vote, turn a red district blue. Um, so that's I've done from day one. I worked as a teacher, serving children in inner city schools in Chicago. And I continued doing so even throughout law school, working as a street law uh, uh, person. And even after law school, I worked with the public defender's office. I started my own startup company and was able to sell it, which gave me opportunities to work at Google, where I was a global policy lead, preserving for election integrity, hate speech, and misinformation on the internet with direct, dealing with the direct harms of AI. And then while even doing that, I was a pro bono attorney with Equal Rights Advocates, earning Pro Bono Attorney of the Year, representing survivors of sexual violence. And so for me, like my entire thing is about service to people. And yeah, that's been my story since day one. And I see this as a continuation of
Love it. You definitely sound like a
that.
nerd for humanity.
It's yeah, that probably fits the description pretty well.
Tell me a little bit about your kind of childhood. Like, where did you grow up, and then what did you study? A little bit of
Yeah,
that.
I grew up in Menlo Park. Um, I think for the large majority of my life, it was interesting. I actually didn't know English to start. My mom was like, "You're only allowed to speak Arabic in the house."
Mm.
And so it was an interesting childhood. Like in preschool and kindergarten, my best friends also didn't know English. It was another kid who was Japanese and another kid who was German, who kind of like also grew up in the same kind of environment of speaking only their language at home, but then like at school, it was like a unique mix of students. And so, yeah, I went to college, and I think initially I wanted to be an engineer um, because my dad was an engineer and because that was the only thing my dad was going to accept. And the hardest, yeah, it was hard, I would say. And I'll tell you this, switching my major into poli sci, even grabbing the application for student government was the hardest thing that I've ever had to do in my life. I'll never forget like holding that sheet of paper, turning it in. Um, just to apply to the student government, and my hand was like shaking because it meant to do something for me and not to do something that my parents wanted me to do. Even when I got into law school, my dad was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe it. You're ruining your life. Like, you should have been a software engineer. You didn't need to pay all this money." And so, like, I think that was like a challenge, but also like my parents are very proud of me. Funny story though, my dad said that the proudest moment in his life for me was when I got my job offer from Google, and I'm like, come on, Dad, like I've done other things too.
I
But
know that
yeah.
feeling. I know that feeling. I think I was at Google and then I left for 7 years, and I'm pretty sure while I was away from Google, my mom still told her friends that I was at Google, and then I came back, and then she was definitely happy about that. But so it's yeah, parents are unique that way, right?
They're unique, but I think sometimes when you push for a dream that you have and they see you struggle through it, they see you work hard at it, even if they disagree with like that approach, they eventually come around. Or, if you're lucky, maybe they come around. But my parents, I'm so grateful for them. And they've done everything for me personally. So like I'm very grateful.
So, what do you think you bring to this race that the other candidates aren't? Like, do you have an area that you feel particularly passionate or expert on that you know requires your unique voice in Congress?
I think like there's so many areas. I think number one is like I was working directly within the harms of AI at Google recently. I'm the only person running in this race that has worked at a big tech company in the last 5 years. And the implications that I was dealing with was AI itself in the matters that affect us the most and the worst, which is like election integrity, which is hate speech, which is misinformation on the internet. And so I bring a unique set of challenges to a Congress that is very tech illiterate. And we should lead on these issues. Like, right now, like, even from a global standpoint, the United States isn't leading on tech. And one of the things that I'm proposing is like a global tech treaty. Because, like, we need to have implications in place, we need to have laws in place that are global, and that is not only something that would actually facilitate innovation, but it's also something that I think would create like a standard and norms to protect us all. And it facilitates innovation because, I've seen it personally. Like tech companies have difficulty complying with different kinds of laws trying to accomplish the same thing. So if we have established like a treaty similar to the Paris Climate Accords for tech in data, in AI, and within other realms as well, we can actually like make it easy for our tech companies, and at the same time establish guardrails to hold these new harms in place. Because like at the end of the day, like tech helps us. It's just we have to just ensure that the harms don't hurt us.
Yeah, I've heard the argument that AI is evolving so quickly that
Mhm.
it may be hard, if not impossible, to come up with guardrails that will still be relevant, even 9 months from now. How do you how do you kind of find that balance between, like, I presume you think there should be some guardrails, but if you kind of lay the cement too early, it may not kind of have the intended effects that you wanted.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, but in the very least, we should do the basic things, and we're not doing that. So we should have like every company that's working in generative AI with regard to any kind of audio or video or photos, we should at least regulate and require digital fingerprinting. Now, my housemate is in a Y Combinator backed AI startup company, and what they do, it's like incredible stuff. They use my voice and my emotion to do live dubbing when I'm on calls. And so if I'm on the phone and I'm like, bonjour, je m'appelle Ahmed, you'll hear, hi, good morning, my name is Ahmed, directly in the same tone, in the same voice. And I asked him directly, like, do you have guardrails in place? Do you have digital fingerprinting such that, we can detect that this is AI and not an ordinary person calling you? No. Do you have like, have you established a way to have like, hash it? Like one thing I want is a national hash database. And that's something that, doesn't take much from the protections of privacy. It just takes like a little code at the end such that we can establish what is and what isn't AI. These are small things that we can do that are not going to, um, they're the minimum. And I think like we have to have people who know how to do this. We have to have people who have a vision to put these visions in place. And if we don't, then like the scare is like large deep fakes, like on a mass scale. You heard, I'm sure, in New Hampshire, Joe Biden's robocall
Hmm.
that came in, and it was a fake robocall telling people not to vote. Um, and these things are going to happen more and more and more, and they fit within the intersection of the other work that I'm doing and that I'm uniquely qualified, which is like I actually started a clinic not too long ago, representing survivors of sexual violence at Stanford, and I teach students at Stanford Law School how to take on these cases and how to actually represent them while taking on cases and representing them directly. And the other thing that we're seeing is these revenge porn deepfakes. Um, and we must have the ability to be able to tell like who the person on the other end is and whether that person is your grandson, whether that person's your child, your business partner. Because if we don't have these common sense pieces of regulation, then like we're going to like see a massive scare and a massive area of distress. um, and we must do so in a way where we encourage more companies to actually get into AI, rather than gatekeep it at the top with like Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, like holding the guardrails for that. So I think that's something that I am uniquely qualified to do, and something that it's something that must happen, and we must do it in a way where, like, I think Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, I think they have good intentions, but I think the scare for me is that they'll make the regulation so difficult to comply with that AI will be gate kept at the top. And in essence, like the worry is you'd have like all these startup companies, uh, or like not even startups, just projects in stealth mode that are not putting in like these strong, smart gatekeeping or guardrails in place. And then you'll have through these like because these LLM models are just getting easier and easier to make. Then you'll have like massive amounts of deepfakes potentially.
How do you respond to people who say, "Hey, if you put guardrails on, like your housemate startup or Microsoft or whatever, um, those are companies that are going to have to compete against companies in China or India or wherever, Russia, and
Mhm.
they may not have those same restrictions, and then we'll be kind of like leapfrogged because they'll be able to go faster."
Yeah, I think we have to encourage these companies. So like when they do put these guardrails in place, like we incentivize them to get into this area of technology. So like we want to push them there. We want to invest in those companies and push them to kind of get into AI. And then when we push them there, when we kind of invest in that technology, um, we mandate that they put the guardrails in place, and that's why we also need like a global tech treaty. And I don't think that's something that's impossible to do. Like we've had the Paris Climate Accords, we could do the same thing in tech, and we could do it within data, we can do it within AI, we can do it within multiple facets of technology. But we need to start having that conversation, and of course, like, some countries may not have just like we see with the Paris Climate Accords, they might not be the best at complying within those guardrails. But like that's something that we must do. And I think it's an absolute must.
All right, let's shift topics and talk about another hot one, which is immigration. It
Sure.
was a big topic of debate when there was like a bipartisan deal in the Senate, and then Trump told his people to vote against it, and it was kind of surprising to see Biden say like, "Hey, I want to shut down the border." I was like, "Oh, wow, that's a different language than we've seen him use in the past." What's your read on the current status of immigration in the U.S.?
I think we need a much more humanitarian approach to immigration. I actually interviewed the director of Human Rights Watch for refugees about a year and a half ago for a podcast that I was doing
Mhm.
back then called Trial by Podcasts. Shameless plug there. But like the biggest thing that we don't understand is like with regard to asylum laws is that asylum means people are not coming here based on merit. They're coming here because they're actually escaping persecution. And the biggest takeaway that I've had is that people are escaping persecution not from governments, which what makes them asylees, but people escape persecution from drug cartels. People are escaping persecution from climate change. And we need a far more humanitarian approach to ensure that what happens when people come into our country, that they're treated like people. I've personally seen the devastating effects of like not having a community that's, willing to be a full participant in society because of fear. Working in the public defender's office, having essential witnesses be afraid to testify because they fear that their names will be on some report as undocumented and that people will come after them and find them. And so my approach is we must have a pathway to citizenship to many of the people that actually are here. And if we have a simple process to protect asylees, to protect people who are in need of help, we will have a far more like secure border. And it's just simple. Um, I think my approach to the situation would be to pass the Dream Act to codify pieces of DAPA, which is deferred action for parents of immigrants, of dreamers. And so I truly believe that the approach to the border must be done in a humanitarian way.
So it seems to me like these asylum laws were written when people
Right.
were literally like
Mhm.
at the threat of death or imprisonment for because of some autocratic government or whatever. And there was
Well,
I don't know if you saw it, but there was like a 60 Minutes story a couple weeks ago, and they showed that there's this part of the southern border where there's actually it's not folks from like Latin America. It's folks from China, like middle class people with, to-me luggage walking across the border. And I think the argument was, hey, they can't get visas the traditional way. So they'll come over and claim asylum. And then, it could be years before they hear back. And in the meantime, they just kind of live in the shadows, I suppose, or they just stay. That to me seems like not the spirit of the original asylum laws.
well, the original asylum laws, to kind of get into the weeds of it, were written like after World War II. And so, you know, I can say that we agree that they're outdated. But when I say that they're outdated, I mean that they are actually not reflecting, the current crises that people are facing and coming here for. So, like, let me give you an example. One current crisis that people come into the United States for is climate change, like islands sinking. And we, on a global level, we must actually change the definition of what is a refugee and who qualifies for asylum to reflect modern times. People escaping, threats from different types of organizations that are criminal organizations, essentially, or terrorist organizations. Um, and that is something that needs to happen. Like the stories that I've heard are, yeah, there's this niche example of people going through the loopholes, but like there will always be people going through loopholes no matter what policy you have. And so what we have to focus on are the people who are actually in need and the people who are actually need help. There's a story of this that the director of Human Rights Watch, Bill Freilich, told me directly of a young girl who was 13 years old, and she was trying to escape, uh, a specific drug cartel where she was being consistently sexually assaulted on the basis that her brother must work for the cartel. And whenever her brother wouldn't do his job, they would force her to be sexually assaulted in front of him. And those two individuals were deported as they were going north back to the country of which they were facing persecution from, because the persecution wasn't from a government. And so, in my mind, like our focus for a lot of these issues shouldn't necessarily be on the loopholes themselves, but on the people who are suffering the most. And I think once we close that loophole, we can then talk about, sorry, once we kind of not close it, once we address the need, we can then talk about, the specific loopholes and the people trying to qualify for things that, maybe they shouldn't be deemed to qualify for. But even in the example that you gave, like, I don't want anyone in the United States living through the shadows. Like, there's a problem there when people are living through the shadows, because people don't become full participants of the government. They don't become full participants of the society, and they're afraid to become that. I think, like, my campaign specifically is about human dignity, and that every human understands their value and worth as a person. Um, so I would say that that's my response to that.
All right. Let's move on to another topic, Ahmed. Middle East, Israel, Gaza. It's a hot discussion topic, I feel like, within the Democratic Party. My read is that the president is pretty emphatically in support of Israel. And I think he did say that Netanyahu has gone over the top in Gaza. Honestly, like, I think over the top is like 1% of what's going on there. And I'm very uncomfortable I'm actually filling out my taxes right now. I'm very uncomfortable knowing that some of my tax dollars are going towards ordnance that's being dropped in Gaza. I realize that Hamas started it, but I kind of feel like there's a complete lack of proportionality. I mean, October 7th was months ago, and there's been incessant bombing of Gaza, and it doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, my perspective is that we need an immediate and permanent ceasefire, and we need to really look at permanent and long-term solutions uh, to the problem. And we can't just keep postponing the questions on what is happening right now. I'll say this. There's over, estimates say, 30,000 civilians that were killed, over half of which are women and children. And every child, whether they be Palestinian or Israeli, um, shouldn't have to have their stresses be worrying about navigating their lives without their mother, without their father, without their siblings. Like, a child's stresses should be with regard to their homework or their crush at school the next day. And we must end the cycle of violence. I heard a statistic not too long ago that I think from a Jordanian official, that 80% of, I don't know how verifiable the statistic is, but 85% of Hamas fighters were orphans. And you must, like, find a way to end the cycle of violence. And that means, like, that you give people hope, and that you give people, um, things to live for. I think Elon Musk actually had said not too long ago, it's like, the question is not how many, like, people from Hamas you kill, but for every Hamas member that you kill, how many have you created? And, like, that is kind of the fear of what keeps happening right now. One, it's inhumane. There's so many civilians that are dying, but two, it's like, these are not, what's happening doesn't serve anybody. Um, and it's not going to, I don't believe, like, the current status quo creates for a long-term peaceful solution. The only thing that creates peace is going to be investing in people, and we must invest in a two-state solution that is results in a solution where people have the right of determination, where Palestinians have access to airports, where Palestinians have access to trade, and they have sovereignty and a right to determination. And until we get to that point, um, you're not going. We just need to focus on what's humane, and we need to focus on a long term solution. Like, that's why it must be an immediate and permanent ceasefire, which is, we need a long term, like, statehood means like a treaty. It means something that's um, that persists, that lives on. And I think that's the solution to the region, is to give people a reason to live in in Palestine, in Gaza. Um, and I do believe that it's possible that we have like um, I think people will say it's complex, it's complicated. Sure, it is, but like I think what's not complex is the killing of innocent civilians, and that we should always say no to that.
So, how would you have voted on the bill that authorized funding for? I think it was kind of a bundled one. It had Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan all in one. How would you
Yeah,
have voted?
I would have voted, and there was the border, so I would have
Yes.
voted against it. I think for a number of reasons. One is like we cannot continue to keep funding wars, specifically in light of. I would have voted for the Ukraine bill and to protect Taiwan, but we must invest in peace, and we must invest in humane solutions.
What did you think of the immigration or border elements? I think there was some more money for border security. I was most interested in the notion of kind of accelerating the asylum hearing capacity. That seemed like a good thing.
I'm in favor of that piece, but I'm not in favor of like anything that would kind of like I think sometimes as Democrats we may have short-term memories, and so I'm not in favor of like putting children in cages. And I think that's what I worry about. You know, when you're talking about this like security element is separating children from their families, and so I was worried about some of the things in the bill that like say like gutted specific asylum aspects. But you know, of course, I'd be in favor of like streamlining asylum such that people are not in a wish-washy status. But I think we need at the border 100% we need more humane solutions, and I think that starts with treating people as humans, treating people as people.
All right. Well, I'm excited to have you back on the show this weekend, Ahmed, when we have actually you and a few other California 16 candidates. So it'll be a panel discussion with, I think, Greg Tanaka, Julie Lithcott Hames will be there as well. We've invited all candidates. It was interesting to see who said yes, because I kind of feel like, well, I'm a constituent and I'm doing a service here
Yeah,
that at least hundreds of people will see. Like, can you make the time? And not everybody said yes, but I also realize people are busy and they have other things going on. But I'm glad you were able to carve out time, so thank you for that. Um,
absolutely.
I did have one question in the live chat actually from James. I To change the direction of our country, open primaries and RCV are required. Where does he stand on those? Like, what is your take on that?
I'm absolutely in favor of ranked choice voting. Um, I think that's something that it shows the people what they want, and it's more likely to actually get candidates that are more reflective of the people. I think so much of our system is based on a two-party system that benefits the establishment in a way. Well, not in a way, but benefits the establishment completely.
Mhm.
um, and so, like, I'm absolutely in favor of ranked choice voting. I think what it will do is ensure that people get to vote for who they want, instead of having to make choices of like the worst of two evils, etc. And perhaps like um, candidates that reflect the views of people actually get elected rather than you know having candidates that are more so backed by status and establishment and money.
Ahmed, I'm gonna ask you a question about a really third rail topic, but you know what? You're
Sure.
competing for a very important office. What is your take on the presidential primaries? How do you feel about the front runner and the process in general?
I will support whoever comes out of the Democratic Party. I'll say that like right now what we've seen with Donald Trump is like a direct threat to our democracy. And it's very scary what happened last time. As somebody who's Egyptian, who has seen like what's happened in Egypt and not necessarily like you know like how like democracy has slowly kind of eroded over time, and we have this opportunity and seems like the opportunity is not coming back. I can see how democracy is so valuable and is so special, that our freedoms of speech are incredibly valuable, our freedoms to vote for who we want to, and have that person, even if we made a mistake, get elected as president. I think those things are important, and I think they were very much undermined on January 6th, and I think it was very dangerous and very scary. So I'll support whoever comes out of the Democratic Party, um, and I can understand why people are very um, jaded and upset at the current status quo of politics, and I'll say it that way.
Well handled. Okay. Sue says, "Hey, I just checked Ahmed's website. Impressed with his profile, pro bono attorney of the year. I would like Ahmed to explain his policy on healthcare as a human right. Wait, she's got a follow up. Also, housing. So it sounds like you're looking or advocating for pretty big um, investments or services or offerings around
Mhm.
healthcare and housing.
Yeah, so there's two components to this. I actually believe that we should have a human rights economy. And that is an economy that I'll start with saying this on healthcare. My grandfather actually came to visit me a few years ago. And he's from Egypt. I'm the child of immigrants, and he actually still lives in Egypt. But he came and I found him on my bed presenting with stroke-like symptoms. Um, didn't know what to do, so I called my friends who were doctors. They said, take him to the hospital immediately. And when we got to the hospital, he began to regain consciousness, but they told us that his heart was beating at 23 beats per minute
Mm.
and that he needed a pacemaker as soon as possible, right here in Stanford Hospital, actually. Um, and my grandfather, I'll never forget this. He responded and he said, like, absolutely not. I am not going to put my children and grandchildren in debt just to live an extra uh, 2 to 3 years. And so the bill was 300K, and I, as an attorney, was able to get him the health care that he needed. However, I thought to myself, how many of those that we just talked about who are undocumented, who don't have like the privilege of knowing attorneys, et cetera, ask themselves that question, end up walking out of the hospital. We live in the wealthiest part of the wealthiest country in the world. Nobody should make decisions, life ending decisions potentially, just because they're in financial distress. Nobody should live on the streets because they're in a mental health crisis. And so, like, I would, pass Congresswoman Jaya Paul's Medicare for All bill. It's actually Medicare for All would actually be cheaper than our current healthcare system by about $3 billion, which is something that most people are surprised by. But even if we give ourselves the most premium healthcare coverage, it's still cheaper than the status quo. Um, I would also like, in terms of the Bay Area, I see my friends struggling. Um, Housing is a very intersectional issue. So number one, like it affects us all very differently. We have the unhoused here who are traditionally known as the homeless, and they're struggling like we've never seen before. And we need to increase our housing supply for both short-term and long-term solutions. We have so many unoccupied buildings in the Bay Area, and we have public lands in which we can increase homes in, and build new investments in green transportation to actually reduce the congestions on the road. Um, and so I fundamentally believe that uh, healthcare is a human right and housing and shelter is a human right. There are actually, as a women's rights attorney, I've represented women who have been moving from women's shelter to women's shelter, and the only thing that helps them is the Violence Against Women Act, which is which has provisions to help women seeking shelter, and those provisions expire in 2027. I would fight to make those provisions permanent, because in those situations, like, you wouldn't know unless you've actually done those cases or know somebody that's been in that situation where abused individuals who don't have status or documentation are sometimes kicked out of their home. So because they don't have a social security number, they were brought here on a fiance visa. They they have nowhere to go and they can't have a job. And so there's multiple aspects of that, and I have multiple different solutions for each kind of in every piece of the intersectional issue of housing as well. So, but I fundamentally believe that, people should live in the places that they grew up in. And I've seen it myself, like people coming back to the Bay Area trying to find a studio that costs $5,000 a month, and they're priced out of here. They should live here, or people trying to move tech jobs and go to Texas to work remote there. So we must do a better job to protect the people here in the Bay Area. And to the people who say that's impossible or that it costs a lot of money, I've shown like Medicare for All is actually cheaper. And we're the Bay Area, we're the land of innovation. We can think of creative solutions to absolutely mitigate the costs. It's just that we just need to have our focus be on human rights.
Ahmed Mustafa, thank you so much for coming on to the Nerds for Humanity show. And thanks again in advance for participating in our panel discussion with a few other candidates looking to represent Silicon Valley in the U.S. Congress. Any final remarks, or you want to direct people to where they can learn more about you?
Yeah, you can check out my website at www.ahmedforcongressca.com. I'm very appreciative to all the nerds that actually came on here and listened to me nerd out on some of these issues. Thank you all so much. Tom, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm very excited for the future regardless. And yeah, let's keep nerding.
That we will definitely do. Take care, Ahmed.
Take care. Bye.
All right. Ahmed reminds me of Joby. These kind of younger Stanford grads who are clearly very bright and trying to do things and push the party and the country. Joby feels like he would definitely be climate. And Ahmed, I think, it'd be more human rights. Both are great. Yeah, and then maybe Tanaka would be more around innovation, I think. What a wonderful array of choices. And then actually Julie probably be similar in some ways to Ahmed around the human rights kind of focus. So we'll see. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Ahmed. Even if you aren't in the 16th district of California, if you were, would you vote for him? And by the way, you can also help him out by giving him an approval vote on ofthepeople.us. And you can filter by CA-16, the district, and you see all of the candidates. And approval vote whoever you like, including Ahmed. I want to take a minute to thank our channel members. In fact, we have some in the live stream right now. But we'll start with our biggest supporter, and that would be Soldier One. So let me share my screen. Oh, we got to get the music, guys. We got to get the music. Oh, Sue's going to donate to Ahmed. Love it. Wonderful. Wonderful. Let's see. Closing theme music. Here we are. You guys ready? There it is. Okay. So let's thank our channel members. Present, share la screen. Boom. Who's the biggest one? Soldier One is Soldier One. Freaking SVP. Next level down is our vice presidents. Kristen Slevin and Bike. Thank you, Kristen and Bike. Hardcore, Gene, David, DK, Jackalego, Mr. History, Mona, Vaughn, Yang, Dean, Galessa, Jay Perrin, Dana, Jason, Daniel, Mickey, Yoda, and Unkiyu. And then at the entry level, which is only $1.99 a month, I will scroll through all of these wonderful verified nerds that you can see them on the screen. Some of them have been with this channel for damn near 4 years. So that's awesome. And I think, well, there we go. And Sue might be our youngest nerd, which is crazy because I know Sue's been a loyal audience member for some time. So Sue, thanks for joining and being a member. And if you like to listen to audio podcasts, go ahead and subscribe wherever you listen to audio podcasts. Bye, nerds.